RPG a Day 2017, day 24. Let's see what today's question is. Share a PWYW tag team champion. Share a PWYW publisher who should be charging more. Just from the mere fact that I was already making fun of the the abbreviations there, and uh, I had to check up what that even means. What PWYW means. And I was kind of like, what? It made me think of a pro wrestling federation or something like that. But I looked it up, and the mere fact that I had to look it up pretty much told me already that this might be a question where I had to have to resort to last year's questions or the alternate questions posted on the question of the RPG a Day's uh, web page. And yeah, it pretty much what it means is games that people have self-published but are basically giving out for free with the option of paying a price for it, and you can determine what price you want to give. Basically, like kind of like you know how Buddhists sometimes give you like sweets and say like, oh, we're not charging money for this, but you know, I give you this these sweets, you know, if you want to, you can make a donation of any amount you wish. And basically this question is about whose quality is of such a level where they're clearly charging too little, or they're being you know, they should you know, price their product accordingly to where their product is so good that they shouldn't just be giving out for free and charity. You know, they deserve more for what they're able to create. And I've never come across these things. I've seen people, you know, mention them on social media. I've seen people mention them on this challenge already because I've watched a couple of videos that other people have made regarding this question for the 24th day, and I've never read anything published that way, nor have I ever really. I couldn't really tell you off the top of my head any products by name. So again, I'm turning to the 2016 questions, and I'm turning to the 15th question of last year, which is your best source of inspiration for RPGs. Now, this is something that I've kind of mentioned every now and again whenever I get the chance, but I'm a big movie buff. I listen to a whole bunch of music. There's a lot of books and comic books that really, you know, speak to me. A little Ultimate Warrior there, and really inspire me. There's hardly ever a single session or a single player character when I'm not the game master that is not greatly inspired by some other media. You know, it's like it's kind of like I've sometimes people have kind of looked kind of like frowned on that, like I would never admit something like that because it kind of reflects on me not being a very creative person if I borrow too much from other sources and stuff, you know. And you know, I kind of look at it the same way as I look at Star Wars. Perhaps, you know, there's a lot of Akira Kurosawa stuff, you know, about Hidden Fortress. There's a lot of Hidden Fortress stuff there. There's a lot of spaghetti western stuff there. There's a lot of stuff about from Searchers. There's a lot of stuff from, you know, Flash Gordon and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of stuff having been plucked out from here and there from all sorts of media. And same goes for Tarantino movies and stuff like that. You know, you don't have to like prove yourself somehow as a creative person by not letting any conscious, you know, inspirations being drawn from any other media and stuff. When it comes to stuff that comes to my head about what's basically inspired a lot of my stuff, let's basically pick out what I'm involved in right now. Right now, I'm playing in a you know, D&D game where I'm playing a ranger, and I'm playing a ranger who is basically a chaotic neutral character, someone who's very like who cares on like themselves first and foremost, who's a businessman who cares much less about the well-being of his fellow human beings than he does about making a buck, kind of thing. And he was directly inspired by Tom Hardy's character from the movie Revenant. The Revenant is an okay movie. It's visually gorgeous, and technically gorgeous. As a story and as characters go, just about the only one I really like is Tom Hardy, or rather, I should say, the only one I don't like is Leo DiCaprio. But anyway, that was a huge inspiration where I basically took that basic idea, and from him, I was kind of like going forward, like I was reading a lot about different kind of ideologies and listening to a lot of political talk radio stuff and a lot of like political talk shows and stuff. And people were talking a lot about Ayn Rand and her objectivism, or the ideology of basically very much this kind of self-service kind of thing where basically selfishness, kind of like in the movie Wall Street, kind of greed is good, kind of this that we're all selfish pricks. Let's be honest about it, and take that on as a kind of a token of pride. And altruism, on the other hand, is all about kind of virtue signaling, and it's actually a very harmful parasitic relationship between the helper and the helped, and all this sort of stuff where it's basically an ideology of giving yourself license to be a selfish prick. And and I really wanted to make a character that kind of emphasizes a lot of that. So I was like, okay, what if I take Tom Hardy's character, Fitzgerald from the movie Revenant, and kind of give him more of those values, take those aspects about his character and yank him to 11, and I've more or less succeeded in that. The campaign has kind of taken roots where I haven't yet been that successful in kind of delving that much into those features, but I'm sure they'll come up more later on. The D&D campaign that I'm currently running myself, that was very much inspired by movies like Indiana Jones and Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and that sort of stuff where you go and you plunder basically ruins and indigenous people's sacred locations and stuff. Action adventure mixed in with a sense of dread and kind of paranoia and stuff like that. It's no wonder that since I'm a really big fan of Aguirre, The Wrath of God, I'm also a big fan of Werner Herzog, who directed the film, a German director, and also the kind of source material for the film, which is the book Heart of Darkness. Both Heart of Darkness and Werner Herzog, as well as Aguirre, of course, being basically the kind of product of bringing those two things together, use language, very descriptive, vast kind of descriptions in the way they speak to you, that very much speaks to me on the level where I read Heart of Darkness and the kind of lush, delicious language it uses, the vocabulary in that book and the kind of adjectives for everything, very this kind of macabre and depressing, this kind of melancholy and this kind of nihilistic kind of tone to it. It really it really impressed me. And then having seen a lot of Werner Herzog interviews, watching a lot of Werner Herzog documentaries, reading his books and such. The way he describes things is really the way I would want to describe stuff, and he's inspired a lot of stuff that I've always used in games. Like, for example, the DC Adventures Midnight City campaign. Things like Heart of Darkness and Werner Herzog were big inspirations for me in that. And I even pimped out, the audio book for Heart of Darkness to my players. Like, oh, listen to this. It only takes about something like 6 hours or something like that. Like, listen through it and you'll get what I'm kind of going for, that kind of thing. Where a lot of times when you get inspiration from other sources, it's something kind of like the D&D character I have with the Revenant movie, where it's something where it's more mimicking a character's kind of demeanor and kind of their sound of their voice and kind of their body language and their motivations and motives and all that. But when it comes to actually being the game master, what I take the most out of a source material that I want to get inspired by and want to, kind of take and mold into a shape of my own and use in a game, it often has to do with tone. And in a lot of my games, there's lots of references where I don't even try to hide the fact that they're references. I often mention that, okay, doing this and this is kind of like how in Conan the Barbarian this and this happened. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that in my games. Like I mentioned about the DC Adventures Midnight City campaign. There's a lot of stuff. Like I have movies like The Seventh Seal, Hard to Be a God, stuff like that, stuff like the Turin Horse, stuff like Heart of Darkness, stuff like that. Very much like this. This I don't know if existential angst is kind of the right term for it, but very much this, I'm getting like just soul crushing kind of stuff. And that's usually what I'm going for. When I watch stuff like that to get inspiration from it, it's like the tone is what I'm going for, that I want to emulate. Because at some points you can run a lot of games that are very like action adventure kind of lighthearted stuff, but at another time you want to go to something more well, deeper, I guess, something that demands certain kind of okay, now you need to sit down, be quiet, listen, and then give your own take on stuff and that sort of thing. There's been a whole bunch of things like in the Werewolf the Dark Ages campaign that I ran. There were multiple Conan the Barbarian references. There's parts where John's character lifts a cauldron and kind of pours it down and throws it off, and of course describing it's of course like of course coming with the Arnold screams and stuff, and mentioning out loud that this is the part in a game where you would hear the Conan theme in your ears, kind of. Multiple things like that. There was a moment when John's character was crucified on a tree, and a raven came pecking on his shoulder, and he went just bit its neck broken. It's stuff like that. And I love it that players kind of see where I'm going and don't take it too seriously to the point where they kind of go along with it, and it's just a lot of fun. In terms of music, it's often the case that when I'm at work and I have my headphones on and I'm listening to music, that automatically, when I listen to music, like things just flash in my head, just visuals flash in my head. I mentioned earlier that when I was running that favorite session of mine of Werewolf the Dark Ages, that I was getting really inspired by Winter Sun, and that was very much a big werewolf inspiration music right there. There's been a whole bunch of other stuff, like when I was prepping for the DC Adventures Midnight City campaign, I listened to a lot of Lustmord. Lustmord is one of my favorite kind of dark ambient music. This kind of, it immediately makes me think of haunted spaceships and stuff like that, dark science fiction kind of stuff like that. I was listening to a lot of things like that. I was listening to a lot of black metal and of course two soundtracks that always find their way to inspiring me to just about any creative endeavor is my favorite movie soundtrack, which is Conan the Barbarian, and my favorite video game soundtrack, which is the soundtrack for Final Fantasy VII. There's constant stuff like I remember in my Cthulhu Tech campaign, there was actually a thing quite directly from Final Fantasy VII where there's that, I can't remember the name of the coastal city with a giant cannon, and then that giant weapon kaiju monster comes, and at the last moment the cannon is ready to fire, and it fires, you know, close range, point blank at its face. And I took that directly in my Cthulhu Tech campaign, where the players had to like scramble to get the kind of the coastal defense cannons operational. And at that point, there was like a esoteric Order of Dagon invasion to Florida where they were, and these kind of squid head giant Lovecraft monsters were coming from the sea and just about to go to the cannon to try and break it, and that's when the cannon goes off, and I was listening to the weapon attack theme from Final Fantasy VII and stuff like that. It's just there's just an endless slew of all sorts of cool things when it comes to getting inspired. There's endless droves of directors and writers and everything like that. Also, a writer I want to mention is, of course, George R.R. Martin, where the amount of detail that he goes into when he describes stuff is just, it's like candy to me. It's like I'm getting a sugar high just listening to all the detail he goes into, and I love doing that. It's like I can't emphasize enough when I'm a game master how much I enjoy describing things, because I have an extremely visual imagination. All of my ideas come into my head in pictures, kind of thing. And I want to describe just about everything to make sure that your picture is as close to my picture as possible. And I want you to do the same for me. I love it when players go into detail about describing their characters' emotional states, where they go to length in describing the characters' motives, what they are attempting, how they are attempting it, and why they're attempting it, and all sorts of stuff like that. There's been hundreds of cases in games where I ask a player what they want to do, and they will say something like they attack or they punch the enemy or something like that, and I always have to go and ask, how do you punch him? How do you attack him? How do you do this and that? Okay, you do it like that. What are you intending on accomplishing with your move? Like if you say that you're going to punch someone, are you punching them straight? Are you punching them with a hook? Are you punching them with an uppercut? If you're punching them with an uppercut, is your point to try and break their jaw? Is your point to try and knock them out with a single punch? Is your point to try and get them further away from you, to disengage kind of from being too close to them? What are you trying to get them to block so that you can kind of ghost and kind of give a strike they didn't expect was coming? Are you trying to divert their attention so that somebody in your party can do something in the background while they're just kind of concentrating on blocking your uppercut? There's a ton of stuff I really want to know, and when somebody mentions that they just punch, it's like there's like a blue screen of death in my in my kind of imagination coming up, and I'm kind of like, I need more detail in order to paint the picture, kind of thing, So yeah, it's visual media is one of the biggest, and that comes in movies as inspiration because of how my imagination works. But at the same time, books influence the way I describe things, and descriptions are what paint that picture of that kind of visual that I have in my head. And music really helps with the tone and the mood. If somebody is just thinking about, let's say, a fight scene, but there's a difference if you're thinking of a fight scene while listening to techno, or fight scene when you're listening to something dark and broody, some kind of ambient background music. Is the fight kind of something that is trying to reflect on the kind of the futility of life. Why should you struggle? Life is nothing but a struggle. Is this fight, man fighting against God, or man fighting against mortality and fighting in vain? Is this kind of blah 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 blah, or is it just Mortal Kombat? Is it kind of that kind of tone? Music inspires the tone with me. Movies inspire the visuals with me, and books inspire the language of descriptions for me. I would pretty much feel good categorizing it that way, and it's a huge part for me in the hobby. The same goes for my comics. The same thing goes for my theater plays. Same thing goes for just about every creative outlet that I use. Just about every creative hobby I do. Inspiration. Hope this video has inspired some of you.